This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellow Wall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 505 of the Yellow Pod. I'm your host Stefan Botzko, and today we will talk about Borussia Dortmund taking fate into their own hands with a 4-2 win away to Bayer Leverkusen, and now they are able to reach the Champions League on their own accord. A few things still need to happen for that, but it is nothing close to a miracle that we're this close. And to discuss that and more, joins me Matthias Zug. Hello Matthias, how are you doing?
Well, I just had to cough. So, aside from a nasty hay fever, things are okay. Things are actually they're beyond okay. They're very, very good. I'm quite happy. How are you?
We're talking to you, dear listeners, at the back of a 5-game win streak.
Yeah, crazy.
We have won 6 out of 7. So I don't know if my math checks out. It usually doesn't. So take everything I'm going to say from here on out with a massive grain of salt. But the fact that Borussia Dortmund have managed this turnaround is mind-blowing. It is something we did not expect. For sure, I am on the record on this podcast saying that Dortmund will not even have a sniff of Champions League football next season, let alone Europa League. Now I think it's almost safe that Dortmund will reach the Europa League. And of course, if they beat Holstein Kiel this Saturday with 2 goals, it is 99% sure, because I think there's like one exception is where Frankfurt beat Freiburg like 7-8 or something like that, or 6-7. And on the other hand, if Dortmund win by 3 goals, it's 100% certain that they will be in next year's edition of the UEFA Champions League. And boy, am I happy. I feel like the last weeks I've been carried by the wins that Dortmund have wrapped up in one way or another, be it in a dramatic fashion in Hoffenheim or the 4-0 in the end, relatively nerve-free shellacking of VfL Wolfsburg, or now the almost freak game against Leverkusen. It is insane that we're here, and obviously we can maybe talk about the protocol of luck, Matthias, that Dortmund needed, because not only did Dortmund basically have to win out for like 7 games in a row, but also a lot of other stuff needed to happen. I'm starting. Obviously, it's an incomplete protocol of luck, because I cannot recount all the shit that happened. But I honestly am starting with a very late equalizer from Leipzig against Bayern, because that kept Leverkusen's chance of winning the championship, albeit just mathematically, but it kept them alive, and maybe that was just enough for Leverkusen to rally back from being 2-0 down in Freiburg, I think the next day, because they had the Sunday game. And Florian Wirtz with a brilliant goal in the 82nd minute, and then Jonathan Tah equalizing in the 93rd minute, I think. So that really goes to show how lucky it is that Freiburg dropped 2 valuable points there. I don't know if it's really lucky that Mainz and Frankfurt drew, because I think Frankfurt rarely win away to Mainz, but nevertheless, I'm listing it. And then, of course, Dortmund beating Hoffenheim, I think also a lot of luck. We've debated the decision on the last episode, whether it was a foul from Chukwuemeka on Baumann or not. I think we're very lucky that this decision went our way, and Dortmund managed to unscrew themselves after they really screwed the pooch very late, conceding. And then, of course, the Leverkusen game, which we will obviously talk extensively now about, but the amount of chances that Leverkusen had in the first half is very lucky that Dortmund did not or were not down 3-4 nothing, or maybe 4-1, whatever. But this easily could have been decided pro Leverkusen after this first half. And then, of course, Dortmund were lucky that the weather was very hot, because it was a grueling game for both teams. And since Leverkusen had nothing left to play for at that point, they also did not really go beyond the limit, if you will, in the second half to beat Dortmund. So that's another lucky factor. And then, of course, that Frankfurt don't beat St. Pauli when they are at home and can finish off the Champions League qualification for themselves, can seal it. They don't, even though they take the lead after 25 seconds. St. Pauli managed to score on a goalkeeper assist and then on a looping, I don't know if it was a shot or an attempted cross, but either way, it was also a bit of a freak goal that they managed to turn this game around in the, 17th minute. And if I recall correctly, St. Pauli then did not record a shot toward goal after they scored their second one against Frankfurt. Frankfurt did manage to pull one back, but it was not enough for Frankfurt to win, which sets up another very lucky circumstance, and that is the scheduling. The fact that Freiburg and Frankfurt play each other on the final match day is magnificent script writing from the football gods. I don't know how else to describe it, but the fact that Dortmund now, with scoring 2 goals, are more or less safe in the Champions League is something that I would have never predicted. Now you, Matthias.
Yeah,
Are there any other lucky circumstances that you can think of? I'm sure there are plenty.
I mean,
and
luck.
listeners, you can let us know in the YouTube comments. But go ahead.
Luck is the one thing. I mean, we talked about this, I would say, probably a month and a half ago. What all would happen? I think the question was, what are the odds? How optimistic are you? What's the chance that Dortmund could make it in the Champions League? And I think the best consensus we had was everything has to go right for Dortmund and everything has to go wrong for the 4 or 5 teams that were ahead of them at the time.
Didn't even mention how lucky we are that Leipzig are absolute shit.
Yeah,
but it's also a very important point.
And at the end of the day, it all happened. It did happen. I mean, and Mainz, the predictable Mainz slide, which Dortmund started, by the way. I figured they were going to hit a bump at some point, and that bump was Dortmund. And it took them a long time to recover. Leipzig completely falling apart, which shows it's not necessarily a Marco Rose problem. Freiburg being inconsistent at the right times. I mean, the fact that they have a -2 goal differential and they're in the Champions League spot, and then Frankfurt, of course, totally losing focus. They 5-6 weeks ago, it was guaranteed, Frankfurt were going to be third and then probably Leverkusen second and Bayern first. And now, if the fates so align, Frankfurt could end up being 5th. Freiburg could end up being 3rd and Dortmund 4th. And that is not a constellation anybody would have thought of even 3 weeks ago at this point. So really everything played in Dortmund's favor. Dortmund also really kicked off Gladbach's complete falling apart. Because when Dortmund were playing Gladbach were ahead of them in the table, and now Gladbach are 10th. And maybe they'll finish 8th, but still, I mean, they were on course for Europa League, maybe an outside shot of Champions League. Dortmund at that point were, I believe, 7th or 8th. And so, they also, we can't forget, this was a trifecta win streak back to back against plastic clubs, which is always really, really nice. You beating,
you know, reset them to factory settings.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, the loss to Leipzig a few weeks before that, I would say was lucky for Leipzig, unlucky for Dortmund. You could argue that Dortmund were, over the course of 90 minutes, the better side, and at least deserved to draw out of that one. Be that as it may, though, a lot of this comes back to Niko Kovac. And the fact that Dortmund in matches that under Şahin or even in the previous few seasons, I believe they would have crumbled, not just lost, but crumbled. Specifically Leverkusen and Bayern and Barcelona in the Champions League and Gladbach and Barcelona in the Champions League. They didn't. They fought back. They were so close against Barcelona at the end. Against Bayern, they fought back for a draw. Against Leverkusen, they didn't just overcome a 1-goal deficit. They also overcame the fact that for 30 minutes, Leverkusen dominated them in every sense of the word of domination. Dortmund didn't exist. And Kovac even said, for the first 30 minutes, we were horrendous. And then it's almost like the Leverkusen goal flipped the switch for Dortmund and they woke up. Because, yes, Leverkusen still had some opportunities after that. Of course they did. But it wasn't like the first 30 minutes. And it was a completely different Dortmund side. They put Leverkusen under a lot of pressure again and again and again. And it's just, in the past, Dortmund would score a goal and they would then just kind of walk through the game and lose, let alone if the other team scores. And now it's like the other team scores and they're like, oh, okay, now we're going to play. The worst thing for Leverkusen was that they scored so early in the match. And
I'd argue they scored pretty late considering the chances
considering the chances they had. Yes. I think at that point they had like 8 shots, and 7 corners, and Dortmund hadn't had a single shot or corner at that point.
Dortmund didn't actually record a single corner at all in this entire game.
That's true.
I'm wondering if there was ever a game where a team scored 4 goals without recording a corner.
That's a good. But I do have, and once we get more in depth into Leverkusen, I do have the "tell me you lost without telling me you lost" statistic. The ultimate statistic. It's the crosses, and I'll mention it when we get into it because it's staggering.
Well, we're getting right into it now. So
okay, well, I'll tell you then. My favorite. It's anybody who's listened to this show for the last few years knows this is the statistic to tell me if you lost without telling me that you lost. Crosses. Dortmund had 4 crosses in the entire match. Leverkusen 36. And that is the ultimate you lost. Because Dortmund play with 3 defenders. 3 central defenders. And all 3 of them are big dudes. So, and for the longest stretch, until Schick came in, which was, basically after 60 minutes.
Yeah, well, 59th minute.
59th minute. Leverkusen weren't even really playing with a central striker. Tella was kind of the striker, but not really. Not like one that you would send in a lot of crosses. And even though I don't have the minute-for-minute breakdown, but the crosses did, then they're like, oh, shit, now we're just going to cross it to him. And then really that's when Leverkusen started to be ineffectual. Because their biggest asset is not the cross to Patrick Schick. Their biggest asset is give the ball to Florian Wirtz and play off it because their passing is phenomenal. The way they can pass their way out of a press is truly fantastic. I was watching the match with my eldest son, and I said, watch Leverkusen play out of a good Dortmund press. And there was always a Leverkusen player who moved into a position that he could receive the ball. And that is a mark of an extraordinarily well-trained side. But then when they shifted their tactics, and 36 crosses is a lot of crosses. That's when it's like, okay, we're done here. And when Dortmund, not so much after the second goal, even though I do feel like that was the mental breaking point for Leverkusen. But when Adeyemi, scored the third goal, it was done. I wasn't nervous anymore because I was like, you could just see in the body language of like Granit Xhaka. You could really see in him dejected. Like they were broken at that point. And that was the end of it. They then also took off one of their more, I would say, dangerous players they had in Hincapie and brought on Arthur, who really didn't do anything. Xhaka came off, and it kind of fell apart for Leverkusen then. And I'm quite pleased that that's the case, because the worst case scenario would have been, I'll be honest, after the 1-0 scored by Frimpong in the 30th minute, I thought Dortmund were going to get now the floodgates open and they're going to get a complete shellacking because of the way the match was going until 30 minutes. But like I said, that's almost like the worst thing Leverkusen could do was score, because then Dortmund really woke up and they played really well after that. So for me, the worst case scenario would have been Dortmund go down 5-6 goals. It's a big party for Xabi Alonso, and Dortmund is kind of they're the idiots who stand there and watch. The irony of it is, though, had they lost, and even if they would have lost by 3 or 4 goals, positionally, they'd still be 5th. But they wouldn't be guaranteed Europa League, which more or less they are at this point. So yeah, it was great. I liked the fact that it happened the way it did narratively when you look at it from a 90-minute story of a football match, because of what Dortmund had to overcome, how poorly they played, and then all of a sudden they played quite well. And by the end of the match, the second half, they kind of owned Leverkusen in that. Maybe not all statistics, but most of that XG that Leverkusen generated, and most of those shots that Leverkusen generated, were within those first 30, 35 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they had, I think the biggest chance was probably the Florian Wirtz chance in the 31st minute. Post-shot XG is 0.6. The normal XG is 4.6. So the post-shot XG on that goal was the same as Julian Riason's goal. So, I think that was, at least by XG, that was Leverkusen's biggest chance of the game. And before we talk about anything else, I think we just have to appreciate Gregor Kobel and how much of a game saver he is, because that was probably one of his trademark games as a Dortmund keeper. Because yes, of course Dortmund did score 4 in the end, and Dortmund did concede 2 goals overall, but nevertheless, I think Gregor Kobel is still the main character, if you will, that won Dortmund the game. Obviously, we will talk about the way that Dortmund created those goals in a minute, but I just want to appreciate, and we talk about this often, any good side, any championship winning team, usually the backbone of that team is a phenomenal goalkeeper, and Gregor Kobel is a phenomenal goalkeeper. In the same vein, I want to shout out Niko Kovac for making him play less football and giving him more focus on the goalkeeping part of his job, even though I think Dortmund did find him, pass the ball to him. I think Niklas Süle had a back pass that was straight on goal. So the trust right now is there, and Gregor Kobel, even when he was pressured by Leverkusen players, did not look like he was nervous or flimsy. So that is a good sign, but nevertheless, there are fewer instances where Dortmund try to play out of the back and involve Gregor Kobel heavily in this, and that is, I think, an improvement. Where credit is due also to Niko Kovac to fix another thing where Dortmund brought a lot of trouble for themselves in the first half of the season. And not, of course, Gregor Kobel himself said after the game that he really liked the fact that he basically got to do his job, that he was happy to make so many saves. I mean, he said that there were a lot of shots that were easily savable, and that obviously felt good for him to make those. But, as I just said, the Wirtz chance was pretty high. I mean, Nathan Teller, I think, hit the crossbar at some point. So Dortmund I think it was Adli actually who hit the woodwork. But nevertheless, a lot of luck riding on that game, of course, but that should not lessen the goals that Dortmund scored, because when we already talk about the first goal, the pass by Pascal Groß to send Adeyemi to the touchline basically, and he then pulled it back. We've seen this sort of attack now a few times. Leverkusen scored the opener from a pulled back pass as well, where Wirtz found Frimpong, and to find Julian Brandt of all players wide open around the penalty spot, and he then converts, was a really nice goal, because it was funny because, as you said, Dortmund were dominated until Leverkusen scored. I think I tweeted that it's going to be hard for Dortmund to score if they're not going to have any possession in the opponent's half. And all of a sudden, Dortmund switch it on, as you said, all of a sudden combine, Adeyemi makes the run, and Leverkusen defenders also more follow Adeyemi and leave Brandt wide open. And a nice and well-crafted goal. And then, of course, we have to shout out Bensebaini, how he won the ball off, I think it was Xhaka. Hurt his leg a little bit in the process, but, nevertheless to, find then, think it was Pascal Groß again, who squared it off to Julian Riasson. And, a very efficient shot into the corner. And we obviously need and must talk about the Adeyemi goal and the Guirassy goal later on, because equally impressive, because the adjustment that Niko Kovac made at halftime is something where I raised my eyebrow a little bit. Now, granted, Felix Metscher did not have a good game whatsoever, so him being subbed off actually made sense. But to bring on Sabitzer, who has played, I think, 8 or 9 minutes since his injury, and to trust that he is the guy that can help deliver a victory against a very good Leverkusen team. Take some cojones. I probably would have brought on Özcan, and he might have had similar winning plays, but it was Sabitzer who won the ball off Xhaka. I mean, there were, I think, 4 Dortmund players around the time when Dortmund won the ball, and then Julian Brandt with a very nice pass to Adeyemi. Very straight pass, but I've seen enough of these passes be overcooked this match day alone. I think Sampaoli, the main culprits here. But it was a really nice pass, and then Karim Adeyemi with a superb finish after he didn't quite make contact with the squared pass from Svensson earlier. And of course then Guirassy, a very similar goal, where Emre Can counter presses, wins the ball up high, Guirassy gets the ball, and just with all the quality he has, just slots it into the short corner, and got, I think, Radetzky still a goalkeeper? I think he is, right? Caught him off
That's
guard,
correct.
completely wrong-footed. And Opta France now said Sergio Guirassy has scored 63 goals in 100 Bundesliga games. Of all non-German players, only Roy Mackay scored more goals in his first 100 Bundesliga games, which was 64. So, underlines what a great player Sergio Guirassy now is, especially considering how poor his Cologne stint was. I think if he were to play in the form he is in right now, or in the Stuttgart time, he probably would have beaten Roy Mackay to that record. Long story short, I think what we are seeing now from Dortmund, and obviously when Niko Kovac was hired, we all had a lot of questions how they're going to create goals, but Dortmund have now scored at least 3 goals in the last 5 games or so, apart from the Bayern game, and often 4. They are finding ways to score. They're finding different ways to score, and most important to me is that they're finding a lot of ways to score from counter-pressing opportunities, quick transitions. That is the Dortmund style of play that we love to see, and especially doing this in such heat that you overwhelm your opponent to the fact that you mentally break them, as you just said, Matthias, is just amazing. And one last point, Bayer Leverkusen fans were sitting there appreciating the absolute marvelous tactical genius that Xabi Alonso is, and how of a great team that he has built. And then once they scored, ran over to Xabi Alonso and got to celebrate all their greatness. They themselves, I think, also flicked the off switch a little bit, and then it all faded away for Leverkusen. Yes, did they manage to pull one back in the end, and did they manage to celebrate and see off their star coach and probably also the final home game of Florian Wirtz? Yes, but it is still very dear to my heart that the decline of Bayer Leverkusen has started with that goal, and Julian Brandt being the harbinger of their doom. It's just very delicious to me. Anyway, I know I talk a lot and I run 90% on Schadenfreude. That's just who I am, but it just needed to be mentioned.
Well, I mean, you can't forget it. This is also the first match in Leverkusen that I can recall that Julian Brandt wasn't jeered every time he touched the ball. Like, I was paying attention to it. I'm like, they don't care. The Leverkusen fans they've won the double last season, doing so in style, and it's like they got over themselves. But, Brandt scoring and delivering an assist, and he was really one of the top players. And I want to talk again about Niko Kovac.
And the pre-assist for the third goal, I think.
The thing about Niko Kovac, obviously, Nuri Sahin, let's just say he didn't know what he was doing. Niko Kovac, however, you can clearly see he knows what he's doing. He brings in Zabitzer from Mecha. Mecha not having a good match, and I think part of it is still fitness to a degree. And with Zabitzer, you immediately, one of the main areas that Leverkusen were really dominating Dortmund was centrally. And so Zabitzer really plugged that gap a little bit more and more. He was a little bit more disciplined. And then after the third goal, taking Adeyemi off, giving a breather, and bringing in Emre Can, and basically tightening those spaces even more centrally, making it even harder for Leverkusen to combine through. I mean, they just basically choked them out at that point. And that was very well done by Niko Kovac. I will have to say there's a bit of a sweet irony in the fact that former Dortmund player Jonas Hofmann scored that second goal for Leverkusen at the end, and Hofmann...
Curse of the X?
Yeah, well, Curse of the X is the one thing, but Hofmann isn't Xabi Alonso's biggest fan, because under Alonso, Hofmann, especially this season, really hasn't played a role for Leverkusen.
It's only a second goal of the season.
Yeah, and
tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah, and you could just tell by his reaction overall, and I think also in some interview I read on Kika, I think it was, where he didn't really talk a lot about Xabi Alonso. So there's obviously some resentment there on his side. But no, it was the first 30 minutes were as bad as you can imagine without shipping 3 goals. But the team adjusted, and then the coach made the right adjustments at the right times. And all that combined basically nullified what Leverkusen were doing. And I think you're right that once they scored that goal, and given how well they were playing and how poorly Dortmund were playing up to that point, it was, a bit of complacency. And then latest, after that really big chance from Wirtz in the 41st minute, and they just couldn't find a way past Kobel, that's really when it started to really break down, because 2 minutes later, Riasson scores the second goal, and it's not the same match anymore. It's just not. After that, Dortmund basically take over. Leverkusen still have some opportunities, but it's Dortmund's match from then on out. And scoring a few minutes before halftime, that's always one of those, if you're the team that's scoring is great, if you're the team that's conceding, it's such a gut punch going into halftime with that. And so timing-wise, everything really, really worked out well. I will say the one thing that really upset me in this match was the booking for Pascal Gross, because he's going to miss the match against Holstein Kiel. And I thought he committed a foul, but I did not think it was booking worthy. I thought that was an overreach from Dennis Eitekin. And
I'll be honest, he had a few more fouls in the end, so I think he would have accumulated a yellow card.
Probably eventually. But that foul itself, I'm like, really? A booking for that? Okay. Because there were a few other fouls committed on both sides that I thought were going to be bookings and weren't. And so it kind of threw me. I don't know. Maybe Aitken had a bad moment in that moment.
I don't know what it was about, but I agree,
Pascal
obviously.
Gross does like to collect yellow cards.
Yes.
This is going to be his second suspension. On bookings, I believe. And so, which, okay, fine. I mean, you've got other players that can kind of slot in there and play a similar role. But I think Pascal Gross was a really good addition for Dortmund this season, has played very, very well. So that was kind of annoying that he's not going to be there on the last match day.
Especially after 23 minutes. And especially because I've talked about how integral he has been in the last games where he has played. I think that he has... really stepped up in this winning streak. I think Pascal Gross has his fingerprints all over it, be it the amazing dummy that he sold to like 3 Wolfsburg defenders, or just he hasn't scored as much as we were hoping, but his passing is really good. And when we watched him come onto the scene in preseason, I was hoping for more of these passes, how he funneled the ball to Adeyemi for the first goal, that pre-assist. That was something I was hoping to see far more of from Pascal Gross. I think we haven't seen this really until much later in the season, and it's probably also one of the reasons why Dortmund haven't won as many games as they arguably should have this season. But to see him spark into form has been good and obviously very necessary, because I think it's expected of him to be one of the more consistent performance considering his age and status and experience. But it's definitely a blow that he is not available against Kiel for sure. And do you want to talk about the final match day, Matthias, or are there still any points? Oh, I actually have one more thing to praise Niko Kovac about, which we already did the last episode, but I still feel like it should be reiterated. The fact that Karim Adeyemi said about what Kovac doing so well is basically that he lit a fire under our asses, and that they are now fitter than ever, and that he is not cramping as much as before. Really goes to show how dependent these professional athletes still are on the leadership from the coaching position, because I know Nuri Sahin's attitude quite well, because I've talked to him myself in the mixed zone about intrinsic motivation. Nuri Sahin's belief is very much so that every professional player has enough intrinsic motivation to do whatever is necessary and to be on the fitness level that they should be on. And that is something I fundamentally disagree with, because I think if you watch enough football, you just see the difference between coaches, and some have the sort of the moniker of a Schleifer, someone who is really hyper focused on fitness. I think Niko Kovac to a degree also falls into that category, but the greater point is, one of the biggest problems that Dortmund had, also due to the weird preseason and whatnot, is that they were not fit. They were not match fit, and of course, when you then have to also play Champions League football and whatnot, they were not equipped to successfully deal with that. I think the fact that Dortmund players weren't all fit enough also had to sort of resulted in the injury malaise that is also responsible for why they're no longer in the DFB Pokal, because if you try to play against VfL Wolfsburg with like 9.5 healthy players, it's not going to bode well within 120 minutes, to be honest. And so I think once again, this game, obviously now Dortmund don't have the so-called Doppelbelastung. They're no longer playing the Champions League. They have more time to recover, to rest, to prepare for these games. But nevertheless, it felt to me like in the end, the much fitter team. And obviously they had much more to play for than Leverkusen. And I already mentioned the hot weather. But you could really feel that it was a strain on everyone on the field. We did have 2 water breaks, and again, the foundation for this success that Dortmund are now enjoying is the turnaround in fitness and bringing players back into shape, and also having the patience, for example, with Sabitzer, of not rushing him, of taking the time that is necessary. We even see it with Chukwuemeka. I think he's still also struggling a lot, and Niko Kovac, I think, is very sensible to that issue, and that gives me a lot of confidence going forward that we will not have a big injury breakout next year if Niko Kovac is the coach going into next season, even with the Club World Cup and all the other difficulties that will arise from that. I'm fairly confident that Dortmund's physical shape will be closer to where it needs to be. Obviously, it's always something that gradually develops through the season because you're never at peak fitness at the start of it. But nevertheless, after Nuri Sahin, and I think this is maybe the biggest point that he had was when you said he didn't know what he was doing. I think the whole control of the team in terms of how fit they are was just lacking. And so, once again, shout out to Niko Kovac of making these boys run and fight and grind and make us happy in the end with a miraculous remontada, if it so happens, because Dortmund do play against relegated Holstein Kiel, and we're all traumatized about expecting anything from Dortmund on the final match day, I think, from 2 years ago. So, Matthias, what kind of game do you expect? Do you think that Dortmund will clam up? Do you think they're going to be nervy as they were 2 years ago, because now they have something to lose, if you will? Or do you think that they will quickly overwhelm Kiel and just be on their way to direct Champions League qualification?
Well, before I answer that, I want to get back to the point you just made about Niko Kovac and fitness. So he pays very close attention to, I don't know what they call them in English, but in German they're called Laktattests. So it's basically the blood values and fitness levels of his players. But more importantly, one of the first things he did was...
I think it's called lactate.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. But one of the first things he did was that he banned shooting at goal after training, because that was something that was permissible under Nuri Sahin before. And the reason why he did that is because that is a time, because it's kind of, and we've all played, well, I don't know if we've all played, but for those of us who have played club football, after training, a lot of times, you'll get together and you'll just kick it at the goal, and it's more like a laugh and for fun and stuff like that. And so you're not as focused, and it leads to a lot of muscular injuries. Maybe not right then, but in that week and in the match. And if there's one area that Dortmund really suffered in the last few years, especially earlier in the season, was muscular injuries. And I'm not saying it was all because of that.
But it's an example of how injury prevention works.
Correct. And it's a simple little thing. And it's a simple little thing that's not going to piss everybody off. Because you're like, hey guys, no more. When the practice is over. We're going to do shooting practice. Any other time, you're not shooting a goal, because obviously you're not as controlled, you're not as focused, and that's when that kind of stuff happens. It's a little change, but it's fundamental and important. So I just wanted to kind of add that as well.
No, it's important. Yeah, I read about this too.
And I was honestly blown away when I read that. I'm like, oh, man, that makes perfect sense. It's completely logical. But it's so basic. It's so basic, but that shows the difference between a veteran coach and an amateur coach, someone who just started, who doesn't even think about that kind of stuff. Same what you said, that intrinsic motivation. That's not how humans work. That's maybe how Nuri Sahin worked, who was an exceptional professional, but not everyone's an exceptional professional. And he should know that, because he played with players who did not have intrinsic motivation. Thinking of someone like Jadon Sancho, who definitely needed the right touch, the right coach, and the right run of form. Otherwise, there was no motivation there. So anyway.
Yeah, also Karim Adeyemi, I think.
Also
we
Adeyemi,
can,
100%.
name that.
100%.
If you remember the little Mike Tolberg stint where Adeyemi had to be subbed off at halftime or whenever, or after, no, he was subbed off after he was subbed on, because he was just not running enough at all. Like, it was almost embarrassing how little work he was doing while Dortmund were fighting for their lives away to Heidenheim, basically. And to go from that Adeyemi, who we were like, just sit that dude, just bench him, is not someone who we want to a player that really hustles and is now in a much different shape, runs away from defenders, scores goals, is contributing, be it as a starter or as a substitute. I think that is also a massive turnaround. So again, credit to Niko Kovac, and I'm very happy for him to continue coaching Dortmund into the next year, because when he arrived here, we all were skeptics. I think you probably less than I was, but nevertheless, because Niko Kovac is maybe not someone where you say, okay, this is like a system coach where you build your entire club philosophy on, but I think maybe just someone who gets the basics right is what Dortmund need right now. And if he manages to build a team and a unit that fights and has some cohesion, I think, considering the quality that is in Dortmund's squad, more often than not should be enough to play well. Whether it will be enough to really play for titles and get Dortmund back to where they want to be, I don't know. But as a stabilizer and someone who can manage a transition that is necessary, I like having him around, and then Dortmund obviously need to go from there. But for now, I'm just very happy that he's here and that Dortmund will enter the next season with him, and how things develop from there, we will see. But at this moment in time, I'm very much in the pro Kovac camp, and I think it's really hard to not be, considering the record that Dortmund are on right now.
Agreed. So, Kiel. All right.
I'm already filled with dread.
Yeah. There's so much build up now. Now it's all going to fall apart, and Kovac is going to get sacked at halftime. No. So I watched the Kiel match last weekend, and
can I add one tidbit to
Sure.
the protocols of luck?
Yes.
Is that the fact that Freiburg hit the bar, and basically from that ricochet on Kiel going on a transition moment and scoring from that and taking the lead. Obviously, they did not manage to win that game or take a point, but nevertheless, goal difference, as we all know, does matter. And Jan Kushu, please next time just head the ball not to Florian Wirtz directly, but maybe to the other side of the field. I don't care. But nevertheless, the fact that this was a circumstance where that probably helps Dortmund in some way to not have to score 3 goals on Saturday is another thing that I want to record in the protocols of luck that are open-ended, hopefully.
Agreed. You know, Dortmund are playing home, which is obviously great. Kiel are relegated, so I mean, they fall into that not playing for anything aside from pride. The pride, of
Might
course.
also be in the protocols of luck, but since we are all burned from the Mainz not having to play for anything on that match day thing, I will not. It's pending. Let's just say it's pending.
Yes, I would say the situation is a little bit different. I think Mainz on that match day were a better side than Kiel are. Kiel are known to ship a decent amount of goals, but they are also a team to not be underestimated in attack. I think this is a completely different Dortmund side than the team that played against Kiel the first go around. It's a completely different Dortmund side than there was in January from a mental standpoint. And I
almost
think
like a different Dortmund side from like 2.5 months ago.
Yeah, definitely. focus. I don't think this is one where Dortmund, the nerves get the better of them, because it's not like they're playing for the title on the last match day. They're playing.
It's not the same hype.
No, yeah, no. They're playing to finish fourth, maybe third. At worst, they're fifth, and they play Europa League next season. And so there's pressure, but it's nowhere near what it was 2 years ago. You know, that was the ultimate don't screw it up. And they somehow managed to screw it up. Even though they almost unscrewed it, they still screwed it up. This is a completely different situation. I think Kiel is going to give it their all, kind of, you know, leave the Bundesliga with pride and play as well as they can. However, I do still believe that there's going to be that little bit of a mental, you know, we didn't manage to get it done thing, and Dortmund are going to be hyper focused, and they're on this wave of euphoria of playing well consistently, because that's also the other thing. If we go back 2 years ago, they're in that run into the final match day. Dortmund had some matches where they really flubbed it. I mean, number one, Bochum. The Bochum match is the number one. That supersedes the Mainz match. And Dortmund really don't have that right now. It's kind of gone from good, you know, better, good, best, kind of running through this table at this point. So I think the momentum is definitely on Dortmund's side here. So I'm not worried about, you know, what happened 2 years ago. You've got a different squad. You've got a different coach. You've got a different mentality going into it. You don't have the parties already pre-planned, because, yeah, everyone's going to be happy that Dortmund salvaged their season. The Dortmund finished fourth. They salvaged the season. They didn't accomplish something great. They achieved the absolute minimum that they have to achieve every season, which is Champions League qualification. So I don't think the pressure is going to be the same. And again, if somehow the fates conspire against Dortmund, they lose and they finish fifth in the Europa League, it's not the worst outcome.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Kiel play really well. As of late, Shuto Machino, of course, their best player. Really lighting it up everywhere. I mean, the 4-3 win against Gladbach was a pretty crazy game. They beat Augsburg 3-1, and obviously they did not have what it took to beat Freiburg at home, but that is, to me, a sign of encouragement. If Freiburg have what it takes to win in Kiel, who needed to win this game to save themselves, and Freiburg's quality prevailed in that one, that should give us hope that even if Kiel sort of want to say goodbye on a high note in the Bundesliga, that Dortmund in the end should just have more quality and determination to win this game in the form that they have to. I mean, we can talk about it again. Dortmund have to win by 2 goals to be 99% safe. The 1% is that Frankfurt win 5-6 or so, and then have scored as many goals as Dortmund. But really, I think if Dortmund win by 2 goals, it's almost certain that they are in the Champions League. And of course, if Frankfurt win by a single goal, I think Dortmund need a draw. So it is not that unrealistic that Dortmund bungle it and Frankfurt saves their asses. But I don't want it to come down to this. But I will, however, warn that you just said momentum. I think this can go both ways, and I think it's very important which team scores the first goal. Because if Dortmund take the lead, I think the euphoria and the sheer force of the Südtribüne will then just push them on to score more, and maybe that's floodgates open. But on the other hand, I think if Kiel cheekily take the lead in this game, which obviously can happen, they're a good offensive team. Now they have shipped 77 goals, so they're bang on, I think by a 10-goal margin, the worst defense in the league. But nevertheless, I think there will be a lot of nerves, all the nervous energy and the anxiety that we just talked about, I think will be very much palpable in the stadium, and that is something that Dortmund then will have to climb out of. And my hope is that they will. Now, we can talk about the psychology of this game, or we can. I think it is still good news that Dortmund play the worst team of the league points-wise. That is not VfL Bochum, because a derby flavor is, again, a whole nother thing. And Holstein Kiel should be, at least on paper, a very favorable tie for us, especially now that they are already relegated. But who knows, maybe that can free up stuff for them as well, if they have to play without this pressure and dread for once. But Matthias, let's just talk a little bit about Dortmund side of things, because we just discussed Pascal Groß not being able to play. What changes to the lineup do you foresee? Do you foresee Emre Can, for example, slotting in to midfield? Something that I personally am not the biggest fan of, on the account of how Emre Can has played in midfield recently. But on the plus side, we would have a number one penalty taker that I really hope, if we get one, he will freaking take, and of course then also convert. But it's still not set in stone how this team will begin against Kiel. So what are your thoughts on the final starting 11 of the 2024-25 season?
Well, to me, the natural replacement for Pascal Groß is Özcan. He fulfills a similar role. Groß obviously is technically a better player. But Özcan, since he came back from the loan spell, he's actually played quite well. So in my opinion, that's the most logical player to put into that position.
Next to Mecha, for sure.
Next to Mecha, yeah. I wouldn't do a Mecha Zabitzer or Mecha Can Zabitzer, because what you're losing there is any spark of creativity from a deeper position. You could, in theory, because we've seen it, put Julian Brandt back there and then put in Chukwuemeka higher up, which would be a very interesting dynamic, or flop that around. But to me, the most natural replacement is Özcan. Also because he'll give you that solidity in build-up. He's also very good defensively, positionally, and he never gives up as well. So that's the one I would say most fits the profile of replacing Pascal Groß for this match.
Would you make big adjustments to the system? Because obviously you could argue maybe a back 3/back 5 is one defender too many in a game where you mostly need to be on the attacking foot. I personally think that the stability that Dortmund have gained from playing the back 3 and giving players like Svensson and Riasson more forward momentum is actually helpful. But there are certainly other schools of thought on this against an opponent like Kiel, who will probably sit back quite a lot. I don't know, maybe Kiel will not sit back quite a lot, because obviously their strength is attack and not defense. Matthias, again, question, would you change anything around
No.
systematically, or would you just keep the winning system in place for now?
I wouldn't change the formation, and then you're just asking to Tuchel it up and overthink it. And Niko Kovac isn't the kind to do that. He's like, no, we've got the system's working, everyone's super comfortable, the automatisms are there. You see them on the pitch. The players know where they're supposed to do. They know what they're supposed to, where everyone's supposed to be. That's the last thing I'd mess with. Then it would be more like, who are you going to pair up in that position? Obviously, that's really the only place to make a tweak. Other than that, I would run out the exact same formations, exact same lineup that has been there because it's working. Why change it? And the nice thing is, Niko Kovac, I actually trust him with substitutions, which I can't really say about either of his two predecessors, to be brutally honest. And so, that's really the only position that he's forced to make a change. Obviously, if Pascal Gross wasn't suspended, there'd be no change. It would be the exact same lineup that started the match against Leverkusen.
All right. So I'm not gonna go there and say it's prediction time. But I mean, it's almost too interesting to not do it. So let's just for the sake of fun, let's do it, and we'll just say the disclaimer that this is not a definitive prediction. I'm not guaranteeing anything, and there cannot anything be jinxed. But after everything is said and done, do you think that A, Borussia Dortmund will play Champions League football next season, and B, who of Frankfurt and Freiburg do you think is going to win that battle?
So I think Dortmund are going to play in the Champions League next season. I have this stupid gut feeling of a 4-1 victory. I think Kiel somehow are going to score a goal because they are actually pretty good in attack, but they are horrendous in defense. And they'll play into Dortmund's strengths. In the other match, Freiburg playing at home against Frankfurt, I think gives Freiburg maybe a slight edge. Frankfurt are frustrated. Freiburg are playing a little bit better, but somehow I feel like that has a draw written all over it.
So
probably, yeah, I think Frankfurt will prevail. I think it'll be maybe something like a 2-2, really entertaining match, draw. And Dortmund will pip Freiburg into the Champions League, which, to say the thing out loud that I've been thinking for a few weeks, it's a great story for Freiburg if they make it in the Champions League. I don't know if it's that great for the Bundesliga if Freiburg make it in the Champions League, because I don't believe they can be as competitive as Frankfurt could be in the Champions League, or Dortmund can be in the Champions League. So if you're looking at not losing ground against the Spains and Englands and Italys and so on, I think for the strength of the Bundesliga, a lineup of Bayern, Leverkusen, Frankfurt, and Dortmund would be a stronger showing than with Freiburg in there. But that's just me.
I agree with that, and it is probably true. However, it does annoy me a little bit, this way of thinking, because if Freiburg managed to creep into the Champions League, and
of course
it would be the first, it actually be the first Champions League qualification via the Bundesliga for both Frankfurt and Freiburg, because the first one for Frankfurt was when they won the Europa League, and Frankfurt have cocked up their top 4 finish in the past quite often, I think. They have sort of this tradition by now that the wheels fall off toward the end of the season. So I'm going in the other direction. I think that Freiburg are going to take this, because I have seen Freiburg play the last 2 or 3 games, and they look, I think, in better shape. They are a more cohesive team, and I think the fact that they have a home game, I think Freiburg are going to win it. So my prediction is that Freiburg are going to win by 2 goals, and Dortmund will only need 1 goal to qualify for the Champions League. So, and obviously I do believe that Dortmund will win on Saturday. But that doesn't mean they will.
Well, and I gotta say about Frankfurt, they have not been the same side since Mamouche left. Like, that's
Mario Götze is
and
out currently
correct.
too, I think.
So, there are caveats to said statements. And of course, the football, honestly, the football romantic in me would see Frankfurt and Freiburg and Dortmund in the Champions League and not Leverkusen. But, it is what it is. And I still
Either
believe,
way, I think we're all winners, because Leipzig is not in that
they're
conversation.
they're not going to have a chance. And they're not even going to make the Europa League. Which
makes them dangerous for next season.
Yeah, because they're going to be ambitious.
And they don't have the so-called Doppelbelastung.
Correct. I think Leverkusen aren't going to sniff the title next season. I'm going to make that bold prediction right now. They're losing too many key people and players. So I think they're probably going to revert back to type a little bit next season.
Yeah, like I said, reset them to factory settings. And that is also kind of my hope, but also not a guarantee, because Bayer Leverkusen, I think, have smart decision makers with Simon Rolfes and I forgot his name, but they are at least on the record currently that they might have some more tricks up their sleeves. So I'm not, even though I'm praying for their downfall, I'm not quite predicting it yet. That being said, losing Florian Wirtz is obviously something that's hard to account for, but still they have scored 76 points, might finish the season on 70 points. That's still pretty good. And so if they fall off, if 57 points are enough to qualify for the Champions League, they would need a 14-point drop off from that drop off to play in the Europa League next season. So I still think they're going to be among the top 4 next year, honestly. But before we get out of here, one tidbit I've just learned is that Maxi Bayer is unfortunately out against Kiel. He has said that in the 1909 talk to the Ruhrnachrichten. So unfortunately, someone I would have liked to see play in that game, because he is certainly a player that would have helped to also replace Adeyemi, someone I trust a little bit more than Jamie Gittens at this point. But that being said, Jamie Gittens and Duranville, if they get to ball out a little bit against Kiel's defenders and having that one-on-one skill on the field, certainly it's not detrimental. But Maxi Bayer is just such an amazing system player that he would be very helpful if he were to play. But unfortunately, the injury that he has picked up, thanks to Julian Weigel, another curse of the X, is keeping him out for the rest of the season, which is unfortunate. But hopefully, we'll see him back in full form at the Club World Cup. And the other thing I think we should talk about briefly is that Sebastian Kehl and Lars Ricken, and I think also Niko Kovac, have been spotted in Sunderland during the week, making a trip to visit Jude Bellingham's brother, Joe Bellingham, 19-year-old midfielder. And with the rumors heating up or cooling down, however you want to see it, that Rehan Cherki is not coming to Dortmund, but probably joining PSG at the end of this season. Dortmund are looking for a new number 10 and also, I assume, a Julian Brandt replacement. I do not watch the English second division. I barely watch the first division, so I don't know if Joe Bellingham is an amazing player or not. I cannot give much analysis on that from what the statistics show. Albeit them in the Champions League, he is also on a trajectory, maybe not as the same as his brothers, but at least to become a pretty good player himself. Matthias, I don't know if you've read more, seen more about it, but if it were to happen, do you think this is a positive thing to have another Bellingham in Dortmund, or do you think it's too much of a sideshow for it to go right?
I guess it could be positive. I don't really watch Sunderland. I don't watch the Championship either, so I can't really judge that. Obviously, he's not his brother, because his brother was already kind of like that at 16. So he's a few years behind. He's already 19. He's like an old guy. No, all kidding aside, I'm sure he's a good player. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this interest and focus. I wouldn't be surprised if there's also a lot of family members in his ear. Hey, this would be the right move to go to Dortmund. Obviously, it's proven out for his brother. So yeah, I think overall not a bad thing, but I cannot judge it based on performances or anything like that.
Yeah, I'll try to get someone that's a little closer to Sunderland on here to maybe talk about this a little more in depth. But I thought I would bring it up because if Dortmund's top brass are seen visiting a player in person, and this sort of thing is coming out, I think Sebastian Kiel is on the record saying that they're just doing their homework. But I think it's not going to surprise anyone at this point if Joe Bellingham joins Borussia Dortmund during the summer. But we'll see. I will keep my eyes open. I know people are more interested in transfer talk than I personally am. But that being said, I think it's going to be a very interesting off-season. Dortmund, for example, have also been rumored to have interest in Ritz Dorn from Freiburg. That be a transfer that I'm a little cautious on, to be honest. But let's just qualify for the Champions League because that will open so many doors financially for the Black and Yellows. That would be such an amazing financial windfall if you combine that with the Club World Cup. The last weeks and months we talked about the Club World Cup making up for the loss of revenue that Dortmund would experience by not qualifying for the Champions League. But now that they could, that would be an amazing financial windfall. Obviously, I'm not all about the money either, but I do recognize that football is a business as well, and these things do matter quite a lot. So from that point of view, but more importantly, it would be a very emotional win. I know you talked about salvaging the season, but to me, it would still feel like a win if Dortmund managed to pull off the miracle to qualify for the Champions League, even if it's just a top 4 finish. We all seen these memes of the this comic strip of the Olympic podium, and the guy in 3rd place celebrates harder than everyone else. This will be us in 4th place, or at least me, because achieving that somehow still, I think, for Dortmund's fate and for the club and how they have to have another transition season, it would be huge to qualify for the Champions League. I'm not one that subscribes to the school of thought that maybe if you have a less successful year, people will realize the bad decisions they made and correct more. I still think that you can correct more when you have the money in hand to buy better players than when you don't. So that is my reasoning. I know for some clubs it worked out to maybe be relegated and then come back up again. I think Eintracht Frankfurt are a good example of that. But Hamburg, for example, and congrats on their promotion to the Bundesliga, where I still remember that pretty much anyone said that it would be so good for Hamburg if they got relegated and then came up a better club. It took 9 years? I don't think
7.
that is
7 years, Zweite
7.
Liga.
Yeah, either way, still a long ass
forever
time.
for the unabsteigbare Bundesliga, Dino.
Exactly. And I mean, look where Schalke are. Like they're
if everything goes
dangerously
bad, if everything goes bad for Schalke next weekend, they could be playing against relegation into the 3rd tier. Like, it would have to go pretty bad, but it's possible.
It just underlines my point that if bad things happen, worse things tend to happen and not magically turn things around for the better. So that is just my point. I want Dortmund in the Champions League next season. And I personally also love the Champions League. We had so many magical Champions League nights. Even the 3-1 win against Barcelona this season, even if we ultimately lost, I think is still a memorable game. Obviously, we had a Champions League final and an amazing run 2 seasons ago. Last season, obviously. So I am going to be very happy if I hear the Champions League anthem at the beginning of next season again, with a whole new journey ahead of us. That's my final thought. Matthias, do you have any final words before we knock it on the head?
No, I agree with you. I think it's better to be in the Champions League than not be in the Champions League.
Exactly. And with that, I hope we will be back next week in good spirits. Everyone, a nice final match day. Until then, thank you for listening. Goodbye.